They told my daughter, "Drink it, don't be weird," then called her family, then spent $68,000 from her inheritance before she could even remember saying yes. And the worst part is, she still looked at me the next morning and asked, "Did I agree to this?" I'm Alara Voss, and that was the moment I realized they didn't just use her, they planned it. Chapter 1. The Day She Learned to Disappear. I used to think exclusion was loud, that it came with slammed doors or sharp words or someone telling you outright that you didn't belong. But what I learned, watching my daughter grow up around my husband's family, is that the quiet kind cuts deeper, the kind that never names itself, the kind that leaves just enough space for hope to survive. We lived in Round Rock, just outside Austin, in a neighborhood where every driveway had a basketball hoop and every mailbox had a flag tucked into it during the summer. Christopher's family lived 10 minutes away in a slightly bigger neighborhood with newer houses and wider lawns, the kind of place where every gathering looked like something out of a magazine. Barbecues, birthday parties, graduation dinners, there was always a reason to get together. And there was always Isabel, standing somewhere just outside the center of it all. She was 16 the first time I noticed it in a way I couldn't unsee. It was Morgan's birthday, 21. Big deal in Texas. Denise had gone all out. String lights across the backyard, a rented bar cart, a playlist that was just loud enough to make conversations feel important. I remember the smell of grilled meat and citrus candles, the way people clustered into easy groups without thinking about it. Morgan was in the middle of everything, of course. Alyssa next to her, phone in hand, documenting every second like it mattered more because it was being recorded. Abby running back and forth between the kitchen and the patio like she belonged in both worlds. And Isabel. She was at the folding table by the drinks, stacking paper plates into a neater pile that nobody had asked her to make. Her dress was soft yellow, something she had picked out herself, and she kept smoothing it down like she wasn't sure it deserved to be worn there. I watched her from across the yard while I pretended to listen to one of Gregory's stories about his business expansion that had been in progress for as long as I had known him. Isabel would hover close enough to be useful. That was the word that always came to mind. Useful. Close enough to hand someone a napkin, to pick up an empty cup, to laugh at the right moment, but never close enough to be pulled into the center. Nobody pushed her away. That was the part that made it harder to explain. They didn't need to. The circle simply closed without her. At one point, Morgan clapped her hands and said something about heading out. I didn't catch the beginning of it. The music had shifted, and someone laughed too loudly right as she spoke. But I saw the movement, a small group forming around her, keys in hand, phones lighting up. Isabel stepped forward half a pace, just enough to signal interest without interrupting. Morgan glanced at her, smiling in that easy, practiced way she had. "We're heading out, just the usual group." It was said lightly, like it meant nothing, like it explained everything. There was a beat, less than a second. Most people wouldn't have noticed it, but I did. Isabel froze, just long enough for the truth to land. Then she nodded, a small, quick movement, and smiled like she hadn't expected anything different. "Okay, have fun." Her voice was soft, steady. She stepped back, already reaching for the stack of cups someone had left behind. Morgan turned away before the sentence had fully ended. The group moved toward the driveway, laughter trailing behind them, the sound of doors opening, engines starting. It all happened quickly, effortlessly, and Isabel stayed where she was. I remember the way she picked up a stray ribbon from the table and wrapped it around her finger, unwinding it slowly like she needed something to do with her hands. I remember thinking that I should say something, call her over, make it feel like she hadn't been left behind. But before I could move, she straightened up, tucked the ribbon into the trash bag, and started gathering plates like that had been her plan all along. That was the moment something shifted for me. It wasn't that she had been excluded. It was that she had learned how to disappear when it happened. Later that night, when we got home, I asked her if she had wanted to go with them. She shrugged, already halfway up the stairs. Maybe next time. It was the way she said it that stayed with me. Not hopeful, not even disappointed, just practiced, like a line she had learned to deliver without thinking about it. I stood in the hallway long after she closed her door, trying to figure out when that had started, when she decided that wanting more was optional, when she had started editing herself to fit the space she had been given. Christopher didn't see it the same way. "They're just loud," he said when I brought it up later. "She's quieter, that's all." He wasn't wrong. Isabel had always been more reserved. She read more than she talked. She listened more than she interrupted. But quiet didn't explain the way people forgot to include her and remembered to ask her for things in the same breath. Quiet didn't explain the pattern. Tessa saw it, though. Tessa Moore had been Isabel's friend since sophomore year. Sharp, observant, the kind of girl who didn't soften her words to make them easier to hear. She had come over one afternoon, dropping her backpack by the door like she lived there. We were in the kitchen, Isabel pouring lemonade into 2 glasses, when Tessa leaned against the counter and said it like she was commenting on the weather. "They don't forget her, they just don't choose her." Isabel rolled her eyes, a quick defensive movement. "That's not true." Tessa didn't argue. She just shrugged and took the glass Isabel handed her. "Okay." But I saw the way Isabel's shoulders tightened just a little, the way she looked down instead of meeting her friend's eyes. That sentence stayed with me longer than anything else, because it was simple and it was accurate. Over the next year, I started noticing more. At Thanksgiving, Isabel sat at the kids' table, even though she was old enough to join the adults. Nobody told her to move. Nobody asked her to stay. It just happened. At Christmas, Alyssa organized a gift exchange among the cousins. Isabel wasn't included. Later, Alyssa handed her a leftover candle and said that it was from everyone, like that made it equal. At Morgan's graduation party, Isabel was asked to help set up, then help clean up, then help carry things inside. She did all of it without being asked twice. She was always there, and somehow, never part of it. The thing about patterns is that they're easy to ignore when each piece feels small. A missed invitation, a forgotten seat, a conversation that ends just before you join it. Individually, they're nothing. Together, they become a language, and Isabel had learned to speak it fluently. By the time she turned 17, she had stopped looking surprised when plans happened without her. She would smile, nod, find something to do with her hands. She had learned the exact distance to stand where she could be included if someone reached out, and invisible if they didn't. She didn't complain. That was the part that made it hardest. If she had been angry, I could have fought for her. If she had cried, I could have comforted her. But she had settled into something quieter, something that looked like acceptance, and I wasn't sure how to pull her out of it without breaking something else. Denise started asking more around that time. They were casual at first, wrapped in concern. "What is Isabel thinking for college? Does she want to stay in state? Have you guys thought about tuition?" She would ask them while refilling drinks or passing dishes, her tone light, her smile easy. I answered carefully, vaguely, "We're still figuring it out." She nodded like that made sense, but I could feel something behind it, a curiosity that didn't feel entirely harmless. One evening, after a family dinner, she pulled Isabel aside near the kitchen. I watched from the living room as Denise rested a hand lightly on Isabel's arm, leaning just enough to make it feel personal. "You know," she said, "your future is going to open up in ways you can't even imagine." Isabel smiled, a little unsure. "I hope so." Denise squeezed her arm, just briefly. "Oh, it will." There was something in the way she said it that made me pause, something that felt specific. I couldn't have explained it then. I just knew that for the first time in years, Denise was looking at my daughter like she saw her, and that should have been a good thing. It should have meant that Isabel was finally being recognized, finally being included, finally being chosen. But standing there, watching that interaction from across the room, I felt something settle in my chest that I couldn't shake. Because attention, when it comes too late, doesn't feel like kindness. It feels like a shift. And I had learned a long time ago that shifts don't happen without a reason. That night, as I stood in the kitchen rinsing dishes no one had asked me to wash, I watched Isabel laugh at something Alyssa said. It was different. Not the polite laugh I was used to hearing, not the careful one. This one was real, open, unfiltered, and for a moment I let myself believe it. Maybe Christopher was right. Maybe they were trying. Maybe people could change. Maybe I had been too harsh, too suspicious, too ready to protect something that didn't need protecting anymore. Isabel caught my eye from across the room and smiled. I smiled back, but something in me stayed still, because even then, before anything had happened, before any numbers or cameras or explanations, I could feel it. The pattern hadn't disappeared, it had just shifted shape. And I didn't know yet that this was the last time Isabel would ever stand at the edge of that circle, hoping to be invited. Because the next time they looked at her, it wouldn't be to include her, it would be to use her.
If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you.
Chapter 2. The moment money entered the room. The first time I saw it happen, it was quiet enough that no one could have pointed to the exact moment. Beatrice's funeral was held on a gray morning in early March, the kind of Texas day that felt colder than it should have. The sky stayed low and heavy, like it was pressing everything down just a little. Beatrice had lived a long, steady life. She had worked as a librarian for most of it, surrounded by books and silence, the kind of woman who remembered details other people forgot. She had sent Isabel a book every birthday since she turned 10, always with a handwritten note, always something thoughtful, something chosen. She had been the only one in Christopher's family who treated Isabel like she was already enough. The service itself was simple. A few speeches, soft music, people speaking in low voices about memory and kindness and how quickly time moves when you're not paying attention. Denise cried, or at least she made the right sounds at the right moments. Gregory stood near the front with his hands folded, nodding at anyone who came up to him. Morgan kept checking her phone until Alyssa nudged her and whispered something that made her tuck it away. Isabel sat between Christopher and me, her hands folded in her lap, her expression careful. She had worn one of the dresses Beatrice had once complimented, and I knew she had chosen it on purpose. After the service, we followed the rest of the family to a small office downtown where Beatrice's estate was being handled. It was a modest building, nothing polished or impressive, just a quiet space with neutral walls and too much fluorescent light. Naomi Reed greeted us at the door. She was in her 40s, composed, efficient, the kind of person who made everything feel organized even when it wasn't. We all took seats around a long table. Papers were already laid out, neatly stacked, names printed at the top of each page. There was no tension at first, just the low murmur of people settling in, the scrape of chairs, someone clearing their throat. Naomi began speaking in that calm, steady tone lawyers seem to master. She went through the usual things first: assets, distribution, timelines. Most of it passed over the room without much reaction. Then she paused, glanced down at her notes, and said Isabel's name. It was a small shift, barely noticeable, but I felt it. Naomi explained that Beatrice had established a trust in Isabel's name. She kept her voice even, professional, like the number she was about to say was just another detail. $1.26 million. For a second, nothing happened. The room held still in a way that didn't feel natural, like everything had been suspended mid-motion. Then, almost imperceptibly, things began to change. Denise stopped crying. Not abruptly, not in a way that would draw attention, but the sound disappeared, replaced by a stillness that felt more deliberate than grief. Gregory shifted in his chair, leaning forward just slightly. "What are the conditions on that?" he asked, his voice casual but too quick. Naomi answered, explaining access, oversight, the age requirement, 18, controlled access until then, full control after. Morgan looked up from where she had been staring at the table. Her eyes moved, just once, toward Isabel. Alyssa followed a second later. No one said anything directly to Isabel, but every glance in that room found its way back to her. Isabel blinked, her fingers tightening in her lap. "Why me?" she said quietly, more to herself than to anyone else. Naomi offered a gentle explanation about Beatrice's wishes, about how close she had felt to Isabel, how she had wanted to support her future. It all sounded reasonable, thoughtful, kind, but I wasn't listening to the words anymore. I was watching the room, watching the way attention moved, the way silence shifted, the way people recalibrated without acknowledging that anything had changed at all. Christopher reached for Isabel's hand under the table. She let him take it, her grip small, uncertain. Denise leaned back in her chair, folding her hands neatly in front of her. Her expression had settled into something composed, something measured. That was the first moment. Not loud, not obvious, just enough. After the meeting, people lingered in the hallway, speaking in low voices, conversations that had nothing to do with grief anymore. Gregory was already asking Naomi another question about timelines. Morgan and Alyssa stood off to the side, whispering to each other. When Isabel walked past them, they both looked up at the same time. Morgan gave her a quick smile. "Hey." It was the first time I had ever heard her say Isabel's name without prompting. Isabel hesitated, then smiled back. "Hey." It was small, almost nothing, but I felt it land. The change didn't happen all at once. If it had, I think I would have stopped it. It came in pieces, small enough to dismiss, subtle enough to explain away. A few days later, Isabel's phone buzzed while we were in the kitchen. She glanced down at it, then looked up at me, surprised. Morgan texted me. Her voice held something I hadn't heard before. Not quite excitement, not quite disbelief, just possibility. "What did she say?" I asked. Isabel read it out loud, almost like she needed to hear it to believe it. "Hey, how are you doing?" That was it. No follow-up, no invitation, just a simple message that shouldn't have meant anything. But it did, because it had never happened before. Alyssa followed a day later. "We should hang out sometime. I feel like we never get to talk." Denise called that weekend. Her voice was warm, but there was a hesitation beneath it, like she was trying on a tone that didn't quite fit yet. "I was thinking we could grab lunch, just us girls, no pressure." Isabel looked at me when she got off the phone, her eyes searching my face for something. "Is that normal?" she asked. I hesitated. "It can be," I said carefully. That was the awkward phase, the part where kindness felt slightly off, like a shirt that didn't quite fit right. The gestures were there, but the ease was missing. Morgan's texts were short. Alyssa's invitations came with a little too much explanation. Denise's voice carried a careful lightness that sounded practiced. It would have been easy to dismiss. "People change," Christopher said when I brought it up. "Maybe they're realizing they've been distant." Maybe. I wanted to believe that. I really did, because I saw what it was doing to Isabel. She started checking her phone more often, started smiling at messages that didn't used to exist, started talking about her cousins like they were part of her life in a way they had never been before. Then, slowly, the awkwardness faded. The messages got longer, more frequent. Morgan started sending her pictures, outfits, places, things she thought Isabel might like. Alyssa added her to a group chat, just the girls. Denise stopped hesitating when she spoke. Her tone settled into something smoother, more natural, like she had found her rhythm. "We miss you," she said once, casually, like it was a statement of fact. Isabel laughed, a little surprised. "I'm right here." Denise smiled. "You know what I mean." And somehow, Isabel did. That was the second phase, the one that felt real, the one that made me question everything I had been so sure about, because nothing about it was overtly wrong. They weren't asking for anything. They weren't pushing too hard. They were just there, present, interested, consistent. The kind of attention Isabel had spent years pretending she didn't need. One afternoon, I came home to find Isabel sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop open, her phone propped up against the glass. She was laughing. Not the polite, measured laugh I was used to hearing, not the one she used to fill space. This one was unguarded. Morgan's face was on the screen, Alyssa leaning into the frame from the side. "You have to come with us next time," Alyssa was saying. "It's literally your kind of place." Isabel glanced up at me, her expression bright. "I might." After the call ended, she stayed at the table, her hands resting lightly on either side of her phone. "They're different," she said. I didn't answer right away. "Different how?" She shrugged, searching for the right words. "They actually talk to me, like I'm part of it." I nodded slowly. "And how does that feel?" Isabel smiled, softer this time. "Good." That was the part that made it complicated, because it did look good. It looked like connection, like inclusion, like something finally being corrected, and every instinct I had told me to protect her from it. But how do you protect someone from something that feels like exactly what they've been missing? Christopher saw it as progress. "I told you," he said one night, leaning back in his chair. "People grow up, they change." I watched Isabel from across the room as she typed something into her phone, her expression focused, engaged. "Maybe," I said, but something in me didn't settle, because the timing was too precise, the shift too aligned with one specific moment. They didn't suddenly love her, they finally found her value. I didn't say it out loud. I wasn't ready to make it real. A week later, Denise called again. This time, there was no hesitation in her voice. "We should do something for Isabel's birthday. 18 is a big one." I glanced at Isabel, who was pretending not to listen from the other side of the room. "We were thinking dinner, something nice, make it special." Something about the way she said special made me pause. "That sounds thoughtful," I said. "Of course it is," Denise replied smoothly. "She deserves it." Isabel's eyes lit up. For the first time in her life, she wasn't waiting to see if she would be included. She had already been chosen. And as I stood there, listening to Denise talk about reservations and plans and how excited everyone was, I felt that same stillness settle in my chest. Because this wasn't random, this wasn't spontaneous, this was deliberate, carefully placed, perfectly timed. And Isabel, for the first time, was stepping into the center of something she had spent years standing outside of. She looked at me after the call ended, her voice quiet but hopeful. "Do you think it's real?" I held her gaze for a moment longer than I meant to. "I don't know," I said. And that was the truth, because everything about it looked right, felt right, sounded right. But somewhere underneath all of it, something didn't, and I couldn't tell if that was instinct or fear. Isabel nodded, like my uncertainty didn't matter as much as the possibility in front of her. "I think it is," she said, and I didn't correct her, because for the first time she believed she had been wrong about them, and I was starting to realize that belief might cost her more than being ignored ever did.
If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you.
Chapter 3. When attention starts feeling like strategy. It didn't happen all at once, and that was exactly what made it work. If they had changed overnight, I would have questioned it harder. I would have drawn a line, said something, done something. But instead, it unfolded in layers, each one small enough to accept on its own, each one reasonable enough to justify. The group chat came first. Isabel showed it to me one evening, her phone angled just enough for me to see the name at the top, Just Us Girls. Morgan had added her. Alyssa had sent the first message, something casual about weekend plans. Abby chimed in with a string of emojis, the kind teenagers use when they're trying to keep things light. Isabel scrolled through it slowly, like she was still getting used to seeing her name inside that space. "They added me yesterday," she said. I nodded, watching her face more than the screen. "And how does it feel?" She hesitated, then smiled. "Normal." That word landed differently than she probably meant it to. Normal, for Isabel, had always meant watching from the outside, being adjacent, not included. So this version of normal was new, and I could see how easily it could rewrite everything that came before it. Over the next few days, the messages didn't stop. Outfits, jokes, screenshots of things they wanted to do together, plans that included Isabel without hesitation, conversations that didn't need to be explained to her because she was already part of them. Morgan started sending her pictures from places around Austin. "You'd love this place. Next time you're coming with us." Alyssa followed up with links to stores, asking for Isabel's opinion on things she had never been asked about before. "What do you think about this? Is this more your style?" It was subtle, but intentional. They weren't just including her, they were building something, a rhythm, a sense of belonging. And Isabel responded exactly the way anyone would. She leaned into it. One Saturday afternoon, Alyssa picked her up to go shopping. I watched from the front window as Isabel got into the passenger seat, her movements a little too careful, like she didn't want to do anything that might disrupt the moment. When she came home a few hours later, she was carrying 2 small bags and something I hadn't seen in a long time: excitement. "We went to the Domain," she said, setting the bags on the counter. "She showed me all these places I didn't even know were there." I smiled, but I felt that same quiet tension under it. "Did you have fun?" She hesitated, then smiled. "Yeah, it was easy." That word again, easy, as if connection had always been this simple and she had just missed it somehow. Later that night, I overheard her on the phone. "I didn't think you guys liked me like that," she said, her voice softer, more vulnerable. There was a pause, and then Morgan's voice came faintly through the speaker. "We do. You just never really came around like that before." I closed my eyes for a second, because that wasn't true. And Isabel didn't challenge it. I guess I didn't. The narrative was already shifting, not just for them, for her. Tessa noticed it before I said anything. They were sitting at the kitchen table a few days later, books open, half-finished homework spread between them. Tessa leaned back in her chair, watching Isabel type something into her phone. "You're texting them again," she said. Isabel didn't look up. "So?" Tessa tilted her head slightly. "So nothing, just, it's a lot all of a sudden." Isabel sighed, setting her phone down. "They're trying, Tess." Tessa didn't move. People don't rewrite years of behavior in a week. The room went quiet. Isabel's expression shifted, not into anger, but into something more defensive. "Maybe they can," she said. "Maybe I just didn't give them a chance before." Tessa held her gaze for a moment longer than was comfortable. "Or maybe you're giving them one now because you want it to be true." Isabel looked away first. "I don't want to talk about this." Tessa nodded slowly, like she had expected that answer. "Okay." But the tension stayed. After Tessa left, Isabel stood at the sink longer than necessary, rinsing the same glass twice. "You don't think she's right, do you?" she asked without turning around. I chose my words carefully. "I think she cares about you." Isabel let out a small breath. "I know, but she doesn't see it the way I do." I stepped closer, leaning against the counter. "And how do you see it?" She turned then, her expression open in a way that made my chest tighten. "I think they're finally seeing me." That was the part I didn't know how to argue with. Because she deserved to be seen. She deserved to be chosen. And if this was what it looked like, if this was what it felt, who was I to take that away from her? Christopher saw it as progress. "They're making an effort," he said one evening, sitting across from me at the kitchen table. "We can't punish them for that." "I'm not punishing anyone. I'm paying attention." He sighed, running his hair through his hair. You're always looking for something wrong. Because sometimes there is. And sometimes there isn't. We sat there for a moment, the space between us filled with something neither of us wanted to name. They're her family too, Alara. We can't keep her from that. I looked toward the living room, where Isabel was curled up on the couch, her light lighting up her face. I'm not trying to keep her from anything. I just don't want her walking into something we didn't see coming. Christopher leaned back in his chair. Or maybe it's something we've been waiting for. That was the difference between us. He saw possibility, I saw pattern. And patterns don't disappear, they evolve. Denise's tone shifted next. Where it had once been careful, it was now confident, smooth. She started calling Isabel directly, not through me. You should come over this weekend, she said one afternoon. The girls are all here. Isabel glanced at me, her eyes asking permission before she spoke. I can. Denise laughed softly. Good. Family takes care of each other. We should have been doing this more along. Family takes care of each other. It sounded harmless. It wasn't. A few days later, Denise added something else. You don't have to think about money anymore, you know, she said casually, like it was a reassurance. Things are different now. I felt that one too, not in the words themselves, but in the way they were placed. Light, strategic, as if money had always been part of the conversation, even when no one had said it out loud. That's when it stopped feeling random. It started to feel designed. Every interaction building on the last, every gesture reinforcing the same idea. You belong here. You're part of us. This is yours. And Isabel was responding exactly the way they needed her to. She stopped hesitating before saying yes, stopped looking for me for confirmation, stopped questioning whether she should go. One evening, she came into the kitchen, her phone in her hand. They want to do something for my birthday. I set down the dish I was holding. What kind of something? Dinner, somewhere nice, downtown. Her voice carried that same mix of excitement and disbelief. Denise said they want to celebrate me properly. Properly. Like everything before hadn't counted. I studied her face. And what do you think? She hesitated for just a second, then smiled. I think I want to go. There it was. The choice. Not forced, not pressured, just accepted. I nodded slowly. Okay. She let out a breath she had been holding, relief flickering across her expression. Really? Really. Because what else could I say? No, you can't go celebrate your own birthday with your family? No, you don't get to have this thing you've been waiting for? No, I don't trust them enough to let you try? I didn't have the evidence to justify that. I only had instinct. And instinct is hard to explain when everything on the surface looks right. Later that night, I stood in the doorway of her room watching her scroll through messages, her smile soft, her shoulders relaxed. They already made a reservation, she said, not looking up. It's this place near downtown, really nice. I leaned against the frame. Are you excited? She nodded. Yeah. Then a pause. I think this is going to be different. I didn't answer right away, because I knew she was right. It was going to be different, just not in the way she thought. She looked up at me then, her expression open in a way that made my chest tighten. I almost didn't say yes for a second, she admitted. What made you change your mind? She shrugged, a small, almost embarrassed movement. I didn't want to miss it. I nodded. That made sense. That made too much sense. Because when you've spent years being left out, you don't risk missing the moment you're finally invited in, even if something about it doesn't feel right, even if part of you hesitates, even if the pattern hasn't actually changed. You say yes. And as I watched her turn back to her phone, already typing a reply, I felt that same quiet certainty settle in again. I didn't have proof. I didn't have a reason I could explain, but I knew. Something about this wasn't just happening. It was being built, carefully, deliberately, and Isabel had just stepped into the center of it.
If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you.
Chapter 4. The night they created the moment. I didn't go with her that night. That was the first decision I questioned before anything had even happened. Denise had framed it as something just for the girls, a celebration, she said, like Isabel was finally stepping into something she had been waiting for her whole life. There had been a softness in her voice, a confidence that made it sound harmless, even thoughtful. Christopher thought it was a good idea. Let them have their time, he said. It's her birthday. So I stood in the driveway as Isabel got ready to leave, smoothing down the front of her dress, checking her reflection in her phone one last time before Morgan pulled up. She looked older somehow, not because of the dress or the makeup, but because of the way she carried herself, like she was stepping into something important. "You sure you're okay?" I asked. She smiled, a little nervous, but mostly excited. "I'll be fine." Morgan leaned across the passenger seat, pushing the door open from the inside. "You ready?" Isabel glanced back at me one more time, just for a second. Then she got in. I watched the car disappear down the street, the taillights fading into the dark, and I told myself I was overthinking it. I stayed up longer than I needed to that night. Not pacing, not hovering, just awake. The house was quiet. The kind of quiet that makes every sound feel louder than it is. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint creak of the air conditioning kicking on. Christopher went to bed early. "She's fine. Stop worrying." I nodded, like that made sense. Around 10, Isabel texted, "We just got here." I stared at the message for a second before replying, "Have fun. Text me if you need anything." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. "I will." That was the last message I got for a while. Later, I would see everything differently, not as it felt in the moment, but as it actually happened. The hotel sat in the center of downtown Austin, one of those places with glass walls and polished floors that reflected everything back at you. The kind of place that made you feel like you had to move differently just to belong there. From the footage I would watch later, I saw the way Isabel stepped inside. Careful, slightly hesitant. Denise was already there, standing near the entrance like she had been waiting. "There she is," she said, opening her arms. Isabel smiled, stepping into the hug like she had done it 100 times before. "You look beautiful," Denise added, pulling back just enough to look at her. Morgan and Alyssa stood nearby, already dressed for the ceremony, effortless, confident. Abby hovered just behind them, quieter, watching everything unfold. "You ready for your night?" Morgan asked. Isabel nodded. "Yeah." They moved together toward the restaurant, the hostess greeting them by name, reservation already set, table already waiting. Everything had been arranged. That was the first thing. The second was the way they positioned her. Not at the edge, not near the exit, right in the center. Denise sat across from her, Morgan to her left, Alyssa to her right, Isabel in the middle of everything. For the first time, she didn't have to lean in to be included. She was already there. The waiter came over, menus in hand, voice smooth, practiced. "Can I start you off with something to drink?" Denise didn't hesitate. "We'll start with something light, maybe a round of cocktails." She glanced at Isabel. "Just something to celebrate." Isabel shifted slightly in her seat. "I'm good," she said, her voice polite but firm. There was a pause. Not long, just enough. Morgan laughed softly, leaning back in her chair. "Don't make it weird." Alyssa smiled, tilting her head. "It's your night, just one." All eyes turned toward Isabel. Not aggressively, not forcefully, just waiting. That was all it took. She hesitated, then nodded. "Okay, just one." Denise smiled, satisfied. "Perfect." The drinks came quickly, something bright, citrus, easy to swallow. Isabel took a small sip at first, her shoulders tight, her posture careful. Then another. The conversation flowed around her, light and easy. "You're finally one of us now," Morgan said at one point, lifting her glass slightly. Isabel smiled, her grip loosening just a little. "I guess I am." They laughed. Not at her, with her. That was the difference. Or at least that's how it felt. From there, it became seamless. No single moment that felt like a decision, just a series of small ones. The second drink came without being asked. "You barely had the first one," Alyssa said, sliding it toward her. Isabel hesitated again, then picked it up. "Relax, sweetheart," Denise said gently, her voice low, reassuring. "You're safe with us." Safe. That word matters more than people realize. It lowers defenses, quietly. By the time the third drink arrived, Isabel wasn't counting anymore. Her laughter came too quickly now, her responses slightly delayed. She nodded more than she spoke, and they kept going. Room service, upgrades, a spa package booked for the next morning, jewelry ordered online, screens angled just out of view of the cameras. Each transaction small enough to seem reasonable. Together, they added up. From the footage, it was almost clinical, efficient, coordinated. No one rushed, no one hesitated. They knew exactly how far they could go, and they stayed just inside that line. Isabel sat there through all of it, smiling, nodding, occasionally speaking, always present, never in control. At one point, she leaned back in her chair, blinking slowly. "She feels weird," she said. Morgan laughed lightly. "You're fine." Alyssa nodded. "Just relax." Denise squeezed her arm gently. "You're safe with us." And that was enough. Because when someone believes they're safe, they stop questioning what's happening. They stop resisting. They stop paying attention to the things that matter. The final transactions came just before midnight, larger now, more confident, as if the limit had already been tested and found. From the camera, you could see Isabel glance down at her phone once, her expression flickering with something that might have been confusion. Then Denise said something, soft, reassuring, and Isabel nodded. That was all it took. Later, when I watched it back, I understood something I hadn't been able to name before. They didn't take advantage of a moment. They created one. Every step intentional, every shift calculated, every choice leading to the next. And Isabel had walked into it believing it was finally her turn to belong. The last frame I saw from that night was simple. Isabel sitting in a chair, her head tilted slightly, a polite smile still on her face. Around her, movement, phones, screens, transactions, all of it happening in plain sight, all of it recorded, all of it undeniable. And in that moment, she looked exactly like she always had, present, included, and completely unseen. Chapter 5. The Number That Changed Everything. The alert came through before she did. It was just after 8 in the morning, the kind of quiet hour where the house still feels half asleep. Christopher was in the kitchen pouring coffee, the sound steady, routine. I was checking my phone without thinking, scrolling through emails that didn't matter. Then I saw it. A notification from the bank. Unusual activity detected. My stomach dropped before I even opened it. The screen filled with transactions, one after another, different locations, different amounts, all within a span of hours. At first, it didn't make sense. Then, it did. I stood up so quickly the chair scraped loudly against the floor. Christopher looked up. "What is it?" I didn't answer right away. I couldn't. I was scrolling, trying to make sense of the numbers, the timestamps, the pattern forming in front of me. "Alara?" I turned the phone toward him. He frowned, stepping closer. "What am I looking at?" "Isabel's account." He went still. The front door opened a second later. Isabel walked in slowly, her movements heavy, her eyes unfocused. Her hair was slightly out of place, her makeup smudged in a way that didn't look intentional. She looked off. Not just tired, disconnected. "Hey," she said softly, dropping her bag by the door. I moved toward her immediately. "Are you okay?" She nodded too quickly. "Yeah, I'm just tired." Christopher glanced between us, his expression tightening. What happened last night? Isabel shrugged, pressing her fingers to her temple. We had dinner, then we stayed a little longer. I don't really remember everything. That was enough. I handed her my phone. Open your banking app. She blinked, confused. Why? Just do it. She hesitated, then pulled out her phone, her fingers slower than usual as she unlocked it. For a moment, nothing happened. Then her expression changed. It was subtle at first, a flicker, then something sharper. What is this? Her voice was thin, like it didn't quite belong to her. Christopher stepped closer. What do you see? Isabel's eyes moved across the screen, her breathing uneven. I don't know. She swallowed hard, her thumb scrolling. It's all from last night. I watched her face as the number came into focus. $68,450. Gone. She froze. I didn't. Her voice broke. I didn't do this. She looked up at me, panic rising fast now. Did I say yes to something? That question hit harder than anything else. Not what happened, not how, just did I agree? Christopher stepped forward, his voice steady in a way that cut through everything else. Confused is not consent. Isabel shook her head, her hands starting to tremble. I don't remember. I don't remember half of it. I thought they were just. Her words trailed off. I could see it happening in real time, the shift from confusion to fear to something deeper. I thought they finally wanted me. That was the moment it stopped being about money. I reached for her, pulling her into me as she started to shake. It's not your fault, I said, my voice firmer than I felt. Do you hear me? This is not your fault. She didn't respond. She just stood there, rigid, like her body hadn't caught up with what her mind was trying to process. Christopher was already moving. Where were you exactly? The name of the place. Isabel blinked, trying to focus. The hotel, downtown. I think they said it was booked under Denise's name. He nodded once. Get your things, we're going. The drive felt longer than it was. No music, no conversation, just the sound of Isabel's uneven breathing from the back seat and the steady grip of Christopher's hands on the wheel. The hotel lobby looked exactly the same as it had the night before. Clean, polished, calm. Nothing about it suggested anything had gone wrong. Christopher walked straight to the front desk, his tone controlled but unmistakably serious. We need to speak with security. There was a pause, then a nod. A few minutes later, Carla Nguyen met us in a back office. She listened without interrupting as Christopher explained. Her expression didn't change, but I could see the moment she understood the weight of it. We have cameras, she said, multiple angles. She turned her monitor toward us. Tell me what time frame to pull. Christopher glanced at Isabel. Start from when they arrived. The footage loaded. Black and white at first, then shifting into clearer angles as she moved between cameras. There they were. Denise at the entrance, Morgan and Alyssa nearby, Isabel stepping in, hesitant but hopeful. I felt Isabel tense beside me. That's when we got there. We watched. Every detail, every interaction. From a distance it looked normal, friendly, warm. The kind of night anyone would have been grateful for. Then the drinks came. We saw the first hesitation, the way Isabel pulled back slightly, the way Morgan leaned in, smiling, the way Alyssa tilted her head, encouraging. We didn't need audio. We could read it. Don't make it weird, just one. It's your night. Carla clicked forward. Another angle. Denise's hand resting lightly on Isabel's arm. Relax, sweetheart. You're safe with us. I felt something cold settle in my chest. We kept watching. Drink after drink. Laughter that came too quickly. Movements that grew less controlled. And then the shift. Subtle. Almost invisible. Morgan holding Isabel's phone. Alyssa showing her something on the screen. Denise speaking softly, close enough that only Isabel could hear. Carla paused the footage. "You want me to slow this down?" Christopher nodded. We watched it frame by frame, each transaction, each moment, each time Isabel nodded without fully understanding what she was agreeing to. It wasn't chaotic, it wasn't reckless. It was precise, repeated, structured, a pattern. I felt Isabel's hand tighten around mine. They knew," she whispered. I didn't answer, because the footage was answering for me. Every angle told the same story. There was no confusion, no misunderstanding, just intention. Carla leaned back slightly. "This is consistent," she said carefully. Christopher exhaled slowly. "Save everything." She nodded, already doing it. As the files transferred, I thought about something I had pushed aside weeks earlier. A conversation, a passing comment from someone who knew Denise about money that had been borrowed and never quite returned. At the time, it hadn't felt solid enough to matter. Now it did. Because this wasn't new. This was practiced. Christopher turned to me, his voice lower now, but sharper. "We're not keeping this in the family." I met his eyes. For the first time since all of this started, there was no hesitation in his. No doubt. Just clarity. "Good," I said, because neither was I. We went straight to the police station. No detours, no second thoughts. Officer Daniel Brooks met us at the front desk, his posture relaxed in a way that didn't match the situation. That changed quickly. Christopher explained everything again, the account, the transactions, the footage. He listened, then asked Isabel a few direct questions. "How old are you?" 18. "Did you feel pressured to drink?" She hesitated, then nodded. "I didn't want to at first." "Did you understand what was happening with your accounts at the time?" She shook her head. "No." He nodded once, his expression tightening slightly. "We're going to document this." Document. The word felt heavier than anything else so far. Naomi joined us shortly after, her presence shifting the tone again. She explained the structure of the trust, the access points, the responsibility. Even with access, consent matters, and impairment changes everything. Christopher leaned forward. "What does that mean legally?" "It means this isn't just a family issue. This is potential financial exploitation, possibly facilitated under impaired conditions." Isabel sat quietly beside me, her hands folded tightly in her lap, not shaking anymore, just still. I watched her as Naomi spoke, as Officer Brooks took notes, as everything moved forward in a way that couldn't be undone. This wasn't a conversation anymore. It wasn't something that could be explained away or softened or fixed with an apology. It was a record, a report, a line that had been crossed and documented. And in that moment, something shifted again. Not in them, in us. When it became a report number, the story stopped belonging to them. When we finally left, the sun was higher in the sky, the world outside moving like nothing had changed, but everything had. In the car, Isabel didn't cry. Not about the money, not about what had been taken. She stared out the window, her reflection faint against the glass. "She really thought," she said quietly, almost to herself, "I really thought they wanted me there." I reached over, resting my hand on hers. "I know." She shook her head slightly, a small, disbelieving movement. "No," she said. "I didn't just think it, I believed it." And that's the part that hurt her the most. Not what they took, but what they made her believe before they did it. Chapter 6. What they lost was never money. The call came before we even made it back home. I saw Denise's name on my screen and let it ring twice before answering. I needed those 2 seconds. To settle. To decide how I was going to speak. "Ilara," she said, her voice smooth, almost casual. "I heard you went to the hotel this morning." Of course she had. "We did," I said. There was a pause, just long enough to measure my tone. "I think this is being blown out of proportion," she continued. "The girls were just celebrating. Isabel was fine." I closed my eyes for a second. Fine. $68,000 is not a celebration, I said evenly. Another pause. "She was with family," Denise replied. "We weren't taking advantage of anything." I let the silence stretch, because there was nothing in that sentence that deserved a quick response. "That's not what the footage shows," I said finally. Her tone shifted, just slightly. "You're overreacting." There it was. Not an apology, not concern, a correction. I leaned back against the counter, my grip tightening on the phone. "I'm documenting," I said. The line went quiet. Not disconnected, just recalibrating. "We can talk about this privately," Denise said after a moment. "There's no reason to involve anyone else." I looked across the room at Isabel, sitting on the couch, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze fixed on nothing. "It's already been reported," I said. This time, the silence held. And then the call ended. No goodbye, no resolution, just the sound of something closing. That was the last conversation I had with her. The rest happened through other people, through systems, through consequences that didn't ask for permission. The account was frozen by the end of the day, every transaction flagged, every access point reviewed. Naomi kept us updated, her voice steady, precise. "They're looking at unauthorized use under impaired conditions," she said during one call. "That changes the scope significantly." Christopher asked the questions I didn't have the energy to form. "What about liability?" "There's exposure, particularly with the alcohol. Underage facilitation is not something that gets ignored." Morgan's name came up more than once. So did Denise's. The investigation moved faster than I expected. Or maybe it just felt that way because everything else had slowed down. The house was quieter now. Not empty, just different. Isabel moved through it carefully, like she was relearning how to exist in a space that no longer felt the same. A few days after everything happened, she sat across from Rachel Dunn for the first time. I waited in the parking lot, watching the clock, trying not to imagine what she was saying inside that room. When she came out, she looked tired, but lighter. Not fixed, just less alone in it. We sat in the car for a minute before she spoke. I told her everything. I nodded. "How did that feel?" She stared out the windshield. Hard. Then, after a pause, "I said something I didn't realize I was thinking." I waited. She turned slightly, her expression softer now, more honest. "I told her I just wanted them to choose me." That was the truth underneath everything. Not the money, not the night, not even the betrayal. Just that. To be chosen. I reached for her hand. "You deserve to be chosen," I said. She nodded slowly. "I know." And for the first time, it didn't sound like a question. Christopher didn't waver again. Not after the footage, not after the report. He handled most of the communication with Naomi, his tone firm, controlled. There was no more talk about keeping things quiet, no more hesitation. "They crossed a line," he said one evening, sitting across from me at the kitchen table. "That's it." And that was it. Denise's world started shifting in ways she couldn't control. Not dramatically, not all at once, but enough. Naomi mentioned it casually during one update. "There's been a complaint filed with the licensing board. It's under review." Real estate, like most things, runs on trust, reputation, and once that starts to crack, it doesn't take much. A client's backed out of a deal, then another. Nothing public, nothing loud, just quiet withdrawals. Emails unanswered, calls not returned. the kind of damage that spreads without needing to be announced. Morgan went quiet. No messages, no attempts to explain, just absence. Alyssa stopped posting for a while, then came back like nothing had happened. But something had, even if no one said it out loud, even if it stayed just beneath the surface. Back at home, we made our own decisions, clear ones, final ones. Christopher blocked the niece's number. I followed, not out of anger, out of clarity. There was nothing left to discuss, no version of that relationship that could exist without ignoring what had happened, and I wasn't going to ask Isabel to do that. We didn't make a big announcement, didn't explain it to anyone who didn't already know. We just stopped. Stopped showing up, stopped answering, stopped pretending. And in that quiet, something else began to take shape. Not immediately, not easily, but steadily. Isabel started to rebuild in small ways. She went back to school, met Tessa for coffee again, laughed sometimes without checking who was listening. She didn't rush it, didn't force it. She just let herself feel what was real. One evening, we sat together on the back porch, the air warm, the sky fading into that soft Texas dusk. She leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. I used to think being included meant something. I glanced at her. It does, I replied. She shook her head slightly. No, I thought it meant I mattered. I didn't interrupt. She looked down at her hands. But they included me when it worked for them, not because of me. That was the distinction, the one she had to learn the hard way. Being included isn't the same as being valued, she added quietly. I felt something in my chest settle, not because it was over, but because she understood, and understanding changes everything. I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. You deserve to be chosen, I said. She nodded slowly. I know. And for the first time, it didn't sound like a question. We sat there for a while, the silence comfortable now, not heavy, not uncertain, just still. And in that stillness, I realized something I hadn't fully put into words before. A good mother doesn't keep peace, she protects. Not when it's easy, not when it's convenient, but when it matters. Even if it means breaking something that looks whole from the outside, even if it means walking away from people who expect you to stay. Because some things aren't meant to be fixed, they're meant to be left behind. Isabel leaned her head against the back of the chair, her eyes closing briefly. I don't miss them, she said. I didn't ask her to explain. I didn't need to. Because what she had lost wasn't family, it was an idea of family. And what they had lost was never money. It was access. It was trust. It was the version of her that would have kept saying yes, the version that would have stayed. I looked out at the quiet street beyond our yard, the familiar rhythm of our neighborhood settling in for the night. Nothing looked different, but everything was. And as I sat there beside my daughter, watching her breathe a little easier than she had the week before, I knew we had crossed something that couldn't be undone. Not the kind of line that separates people, the kind that defines you, the kind that tells you what you will and won't accept, the kind that once you see it clearly, you never ignore again. So I'll ask you this. At what point would you have said no and walked away from people who only saw your worth when it came with a number?